Välkommen alla sammen. Hospitality. Not only was hospitality a fundamental and highest valued part of all Norse and ancient Germanic culture, but being a good host was actually tied into our morality, ethics, and even spirituality. And being a good host, unfortunately, is the number one thing that modern Germanic countries have almost completely lost touch with in the past couple generations at least. I don't think it's because we've grown to be selfish and greedy. No, hospitality is ingrained into our DNA. And I think what's changed over time is the manner of guests that we have come into contact with, so we in turn have become more weary of welcoming guests. And it's not that we're afraid of welcoming guests and being taken advantage of. No, we are scared of welcoming a guest and telling them no when they have overstepped their boundaries. We're scared of the passive-aggressive, awkward conversation that may have to take place should that situation come up. But I have a solution for that at the end of the video. But for now, on to the sources. First, let's start with the oldest ones we have, the oldest written ones at least, about the Germanic tribes. And by the way, I'm not saying the Germanic peoples were the only ones in the world with a strong sense of hospitality. The Greeks and Romans were so as well, with their concepts of Xenia and Hospitium. They had that also ingrained in their spirituality. So the Greeks and Romans too were very good hosts before this, but it seems like they had actually lost it by this time in their culture. We're talking around the 1st century BC AD. But the Germanic tribes preserved this, and you can see how surprised a Roman was at the hospitality of the Germanic tribes. Look how beautiful he described the Germanic peoples and their hospitality. All the way to the point that if you had a guest and they ate all your food, it was now your duty to guide that guest to the next house to continue on the feast. Blah blah blah. Tacitus was not a reliable source, some people say, whenever they read something that they don't want to agree with. But we have yet another source from the same time, written by Julius Caesar himself, about how hospitable the Germanic tribes were. Yeah, sure, Roman sources sometimes painted their enemies in a bad light, and they're not reliable, but they don't just make up things like this. And especially since it's written in multiple sources over the span of a couple hundred years, no reason to believe that this is not true, especially since the early attestations of the Germanic tribes and their hospitality agrees with all the other late-on evidence. Now we can get to the speciality of this channel, the sources from the Viking Age. One of the many peoples that descended from the Germanic tribes that Taqcitus and Caesar spoke about were the Norse of the time. And I'm sure there were plenty of other Germanic peoples that were good hosts at the time, like the Saxons, the Frisians, the Angles, and so on. It's just that we have more records of good hospitality among the Norse sources. And the Norse were still pagan at the time, unlike the other Germanic places in Europe. So we find examples of hospitality being involved in the culture and the actual religious morality and spirituality of the Norse during the Viking Age. The most famous example of these sources is in Havamal, the words of the High One, said to be advice and guidance from Odin himself. And almost half of this poem actually is about being a good host and being a good guest. I won't go into all of it, I'm just putting a few stanzas of it up here, but hospitality is written about in this poem of advice and ethics more than any other topic, so you can see how important being a good host and being a good guest was to their morality and even, spiritual based ethics. Another source comes in Grimnismal. We have a king in this poem named Geirröd, and he had a horrible reputation for being a bad host. Odin and his wife saw this, observed this king, and they made a wager, and Odin thought that Geirröd would welcome him warmly as a guest, and Frigg, of course, didn't think that. Odin went to visit him, and Geirröd did not welcome Odin warmly, and instead he actually imprisoned him and tortured him. Odin was in disguise, of course, he didn't know it was actually Odin, but it was Geirröd's son Auðunar who helped Odin and visited him in the dungeons and brought him some drinks and some food and that kind of stuff. And it was Odin who gave the son Auðunar all this wisdom that was displayed in the poem, and he actually used magic to have Auðunar's father Geirröd killed, and then the young Auðunar became king. So it just shows what being a good host or being a bad host can have for your future. But my number one favorite source on hospitality actually comes in a poem called Rigsthula, where hospitality played a part in what class of man you would become. Rígr, another name for Heimdall, the god, in this poem was said to father the social classes of mankind. Rig, in the early days of humans, went traveling, and he sought shelter among 3 different families at 3 different nights. The first family took him in, and they offered him shelter and a poor, crappy dinner. Rig blessed that couple with a child named Threll, and when that child had children, they all grew up strong, but ugly and swarthy and dishonorable. This is what the slave or Thrall class of humans are descended from. The second family that Rig visited, they gave him better shelter and better food, and Rig blessed them with a beautiful, strong, honorable son named Karl. This is what all the regular freemen of the world are descended from. Then the third family, when Rig showed up, they gave him a great place to sleep and excellent food. This couple, Rig blessed with a beautiful, blonde, bright boy named Jarl, who would be growing up to do great things, and this is actually where all chieftains and kings are said to descend from. The story goes on, but that's the point of it for this video, guys. These are the 3 social classes in the Viking Age: Thrall, Karl, and Jarl, slave, freeman, and chieftain or noble. So the very acts of how well you treated a guest were believed to determine how well Rig, or the gods, or karma in general, whatever you want to call it, this determined your status and honor in life for many generations to come. The Rigsthula is actually probably my favorite out of all the Norse poems, very underrated, so I recommend you all check that out. Other than that, we can speak about a couple sagas, guys. You can read any saga you want. You won't get more than a couple pages without reading about how good the hospitality of the Norse was in the time. But one I'll bring up is called Auðunar þáttr. The saga is told in a couple different manuscripts, but the story goes Auðun is basically a traveler, and he is accepted as an honored guest by many powerful men in his travels. One chieftain named Thorstein. He was also visiting a Norwegian king, Harald Hardrada, you may have heard of him, and he also welcomed him warmly and gave Auðun gifts. Auðun also visited the Danish king Svein II, and he took in Auðun and offered him great hospitality, and King Svein gave him, when he left, he gave him a ship with goods, a purse full of silver, and a gold armband from his own arm. The reason I bring this up is that nobody was above anyone else when it came to hospitality. Even a king would take in a peasant and be a good host, if the guest was also a good guest. And this is the case in this story. Auðun didn't just show up like a bum everywhere with his hand out asking for something. No, he offered to work, he arrived with gifts, he arrived with good manners and praise for the hosts. He even gave King Svein his pet polar bear. So when you are a good guest, you would be received by a good host, no matter if what the class was: slave, peasant, chieftain, or king. But you don't need to be a king to be a good host. Even if you were poor, that was no excuse to be a shitty host. And another saga that I'll touch on briefly is called Bandamanna saga. There are countless examples of hospitality, but one of the great ones was a man named Ulfheig. He is described as being a great and honorable man and a great host, even though he was not well off financially. He did not deny anyone hospitality. In this same saga, there's another man who is actually a goði, like a wealthy religious leader named Styrmir, and he had basically a horrible reputation because he accepted gifts from others, but he did not give any in return, and he did not offer good hospitality to those visiting. So being a bad host definitely gave you a bad reputation by everyone around. Those are just a couple notable examples, guys, but again, read the sagas. You will not get more than a couple pages without reading something about hospitality. Sometimes there's even 2, 3, 4 chapters that are dedicated to just telling about how one friend was invited to stay the winter with another friend as a guest, and they use another 2 or 3 chapters telling about all the nice gifts that they gave each other. This was an aspect of our culture, guys. It sounds weird to us today because now we can just turn on the TV or get our phone and tune out the world, and taking in a guest in our modern day and age sounds like a hassle, but previously in history, nothing brought us more joy than seeing an old friend or having a new acquaintance over. We did everything possible to make them feel welcome and comfortable. The problem becomes when we get guests who take advantage of our hospitality, and then we become bitter and angry about it, and we end up turning into permanent bad hosts. This happens on the small personal scale in your regular family home. It happens in larger parties and events, and it happens in nations as a whole as well. The solution is not to act rude and passive aggressive and make your guests feel unwelcome. The solution is not either to argue amongst each other and go on a witch hunt accusing people of being racist because they don't like the manner of guests that are being welcomed in. The solution is to just say no. When a guest has overstepped their bounds and not behaved, there is a diplomatic way to just say no, whether it's your cousin or childhood friend or unwanted party of hundreds or thousands of people. You just need to tell them, hey, it's time to go. You've overstayed your welcome. But I'm hungry and I'm tired and I have nowhere else to go. Are you really gonna throw me out? Yes, I am. You are welcome back another time. Maybe next time you will behave better, you can tell them. But what do you mean I didn't do anything wrong? What are you talking about? I didn't misbehave. My friend, you are doing it right now. You feel entitled to my hospitality and you feel that I owe you something. This is not a debate. It is my home to invite whoever and whenever I choose. You are free to do the same in your home. This is not up for discussion. And guys, you just need to practice saying things like this. It's really not a negotiation who you invite into your house and when you decide that they leave. It's their job to convince you to make them want to stay if that is what they want. And if we all do that, we will create better guests in society, and it will in turn bring us back to being better hosts like we used to be in old times. Because that is so important, guys, to take care of each other. Right now, currently in the world, we are living in a very thriving time in history, and it's a very easy time in history, and many people can function just fine being selfish, but this easy time is not going to last forever. Humans have always survived through the hard times in history by taking care of each other, and this is the number one way to survive any type of hardship that may and will come our way. So that's all for today. Hope you enjoyed the video and gave you a different outlook on things. Vi ses nästa gång.